Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.
Hello, good morning, Pastor.
Hey, good morning, Daniel.
It's great to have you with us, as always. It's so good to have you with us, as always.
Oh, well, you have your own pastor. What can I say? Boom's pastor.
Yes.
Nathan's pastor. Well, no, everybody's got their own church and all that, but I try to bring a voice here.
Of course.
And speak using this medium, which I always say I'm very, very grateful for. So, good morning, Mario, and good morning, Flex, and to all of our listeners.
Mario stepped out,
Mario
but Flex is here. Yeah, Pastor said
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. And Daniel, I heard your story this morning, actually. You shared about your encounter yesterday, and you felt it was like a kind of divinely orchestrated thing, the way it played out. You were in the right place at the right time, and so I appreciate that the fact that you want to make a move on it. Today, I'm provoked to say some things about it, to be honest with you. So, but I don't. Let me be very careful here. As a counselor myself, I don't want to get too locked down in the particular specific story, if you don't mind. You know how, because there might be issues related to that, and so I don't want to give it too much public air and attention. You're doing the right thing, Daniel, and saying we have an issue with children. Anecdotally, you brought that, but I want to move beyond that because I don't know mental state of the mom.
That's why I mentioned,
So I'm going a little bit beyond that to say some related things. And listen, you can ask questions along the way, by the way,
Sure.
because this is your story today, so you can really feel like at any point, as long as I hear your voice, because sometimes I don't hear when you're trying to get in there. But I think what I really want to say is something that we already know. This story highlights something that is embedded within our our reality here in St. Vincent and how things happen. The vast difference and disparity between the macro structure and the micro reality. So let me explain what I mean. No, let me say that again. There's a big difference between our macro structure and our micro reality. On a macro level, right, Daniel? On a macro, hear me well. On a macro level, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is one of the safest places on earth for children. Before you react to that, digest that. On a macro level, one of the safest places on earth for children. But on a micro level is a different story altogether. Let me clarify. Why do I say on a macro level it's the safest place on earth for children? Because of what exists at that level. We have all kinds of legal and social protection here in St. Vincent in place. Let me show you what I mean. You might be familiar with the National Child Protection Policy under this current administration. That's 2016, by the way, if you're looking for a reference date. I have talked on this radio and referred time and time again to the Child Care and Adoption Act. That's a different thing altogether. That's 2010. And then you have the Status of the Children Act. That's 2011. All of these are within the macro structure. As part of the Domestic Violence Act, you have protections for children. That Domestic Violence Act is 2015. And then outside of St. Vincent, where we have to maybe even forced to, when I say force, not by some kind of coercive thing, but by monetary force and other diplomatic force, we do dot the I's, or we subscribe to the UN's, because as part of the UN, and now that we are in the Security Council, yes, we subscribe to the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. I've read that through, and it is like a child's paradise if all of that is actually enforced. When I read, as I gave my students a couple of years ago, I gave them that assignment to read the UN Convention of the, when I say student, counseling students, teaching counseling, UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. And I say, if this were to obtain in our country, that's where a child should grow up. And because I'm just making passing reference, it might be good for my listeners to Google the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child and see what is afforded there. But the thing is, St. Vincent signs off on that. So did you hear what I just said, Daniel, about the National Protection Policy and Adoption Act and Status of the Children Act and the Domestic Violence Act and UN Convention of the Rights of the Child? We have a great macro structure. So that's why I said on a macro level, SVG is really the safest place. But again, to go back to my earlier statement, on a micro level, you're talking a different story. So if you get away from the macro structure, what are you looking at? If you get away from the macro level, if the macro level has structure, you can't blame, you can't, question that we have structure in St. Vincent. We have legal framework provided through the Children Care and Adoption Act. We have that. We have organizational framework through the minister and the Ministry of Mobilization. We have organizational framework. So we're looking good on the macro level. All right, let's come down from the macro level and get down to the weeds, and that's where a lot of our problems are. I said this is not something that is unique to child care and child protection. This is something that exists on many, many levels. We have great looking structure. The other morning when I commented on that, Daniel, if you remember what I said, we have great window dressing. You remember that well. I said we have great window dressing. But when you get down from the topographical 30,000 foot level and start getting down in the weeds, it's a different matter. What exists in the weeds, it doesn't look the same way it looks from the topographical 30,000 foot level. Because on the micro level now, you're not talking structure and legal framework and organizational framework and window dressing. On the micro level where the child is hurting, we are talking about resources, particularly money, but other resources. We are talking case officers. And in my experience and knowing how many children fit what you described this morning, the army, you hear me, the army of case officers you would need to, because a lot of people listening to this and commenting, your heart is moved, but in terms of the awareness of what is involved in addressing every single case, the gobs of hours in the investigation and putting a case together, taking your time so it's not a brush over, so that you actually sit and do interviews with the child and you gather information to take action. All of this has to be prepared, the case file, everything to be taken to court. It's a rather time-consuming process, and it has to be legally done. And you need case officers like crazy, because one case officer might take let's say, each case varies. Well, let's say to thoroughly investigate a case, a couple of weeks, and then you multiply that, you replicate that out throughout St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You don't have the personnel, you don't have the staff, you don't have enough adequately trained case officers to really do the job, but you can have them there as window dressing. Enough respect to those who do the job, but I'm saying it is insufficient. So the fact that you have case officers basically say, oh yeah, we have case officers, insufficient. I have had questions about the thoroughness of the investigations done, and I understand why. Because if you don't have the requisite amount of case officers, and then you have a mountain of cases, and cases that you should spend 2 or 3 weeks on, you might end up spending 2 or 3 days on, some 2 or 3 hours on too. So you might make a call and get some information, say, okay, that's good, but you might not be willing to do the leg work. Legs on the ground, at a micro level, when you examine, great macro structure, but legs on the ground, you don't have, going through the villages, checking on the home. I remember once I went through the entire procedure with a child that was severely abused. I mean, emotionally and physically abused. And at the end of the day, because proper casework wasn't done, because there were not enough legs on the ground, and mind you, this is a counselor who knows X, Y, and Z about, going through this. I'm a counselor making that recommendation for action on the basis of the Child Care and Protection Act, and Child Care and Adoption Act. And the outcome of that was that the parent got rewarded. I mean, the parent got rewarded just because the legwork was not done, just because a home visit was not done, just because a proper case was not done. It didn't even get to the court. It was just a decision by the caseworker. Oh, this mother needs X, Y, and Z, so we're going to give it to her. The child is still in that situation. So when our hearts are moved, sometimes legs don't move. On the micro level, do we have the approach for effective enforcement of the Children Care and Adoption Act? It really necessitates adequate placement facilities. And when you examine these on a micro level, they don't match what is promised on the macro level. So to go back to my statement, safest place to live on earth, if you look at SVG from the macro level, for children. But God have mercy when you look on the micro level. And the truth be told, like I said, I'm going to get away from your story this morning because that has details I don't want aired and stuff like that. But the truth be told, we have many cases like this. And there are multiple reasons, and it is a sociological, it is a testament. The fact that we have so many cases like this, Daniel, it is a testament to our sociological condition here in St. Vincent. I'm not big on social determinism, but the truth is, in many cases, how our society functions and operates and values or lack thereof will produce a social outcome. I've talked about this so many times, social outcomes, where people live, how they're brought up, what their income levels are, how they're educated. You study deprived and depressed communities, and you could almost predict that the story in a particular village of how children are parented. Now, it's not exclusive, but predominantly given, especially in a deprived situation, environment, deprived community. It's a different story in comparison to how children are raised in another setting. So there's that social determinism there that I don't 100% subscribe to. But there are multiple reasons why this is the case. We can't get away from it. That on the micro level, we have many abused children under the age of 18, and even boys too, who I encounter. You go to any supermarket, 5 little boys are going to come out and beg you for something. It's not isolated at all. Whether it is financial abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, it is there. It is not a reality that you are making up, Daniel. And your encounter yesterday is not an aberration. It is not outside the norm. And that is what is sad about it. So the question is, if this is indeed and in truth and in fact our reality, if that is the case, then what should be done? I don't know if this is the first time you encountered something like that, and you and your friend and you decide to call the police. And the reason why I figured that you call the police, that is the default thinking of our people when we encounter situations like this. Call the police. I don't blame you for doing that, because I don't know that enough. We go through all of these procedures to pass and build this macro structure, legal framework and organizational framework. But the majority of Vincentians, one, might not be aware that such a framework exists, and two, might not have a grasp of the processes that should be followed under these framework. And so you encounter or you become aware. You're not the only person, by the way, Daniel, that's aware of a child that's abused. I mean, people all over, they know. But what is the right structure? What is the right process? Who do I call? And then we call the police. No, not to defend the police, but I understand that the police might probably be inundated with calls from all. Where I've commented on this before, I said with regards to police and police work, we have to be careful. Daniel, I'm not throwing shades, okay, but we have to be very careful what we call the police for, because sometimes if we call them for things that we should not call them for, then that represents to me a diversion of resources. So you know you need the police for X, Y, and Z, but for child protection, do you need to be calling the police, or is there a different line that you should be calling? Is there different access and avenue? What's the procedure and process? Again, sometimes if we call the police for things that we should not be calling them for, it will move them away and divert resources from where they actually should be. But why do people do this? People do this because that's the default drive. They don't know who to call. We have to call the police. And I think, therefore, that represents to me that people are not very well educated about the Protection Act, the policies for protection of children, child care, for example, the Children Care and Protection Act of 2010. Because that is fundamental, because that really matters, and because it is not an isolated thing, but it affects a percentage of our population. If it is so important, effort should be made in educating the public about this issue and what should be done, because these things, abuse of children in St. Vincent is not happening in isolated situations and circumstances. It is more common than we would want to confess. And that being the case, I think that whether it is through API, or API has so many things to do, let me move on from that quickly, or other avenues to be used to educate people as to what is in the Child Care and Adoption Act and how it, should be followed. What do you do? And I don't have enough time this morning, but I'll tell you a couple of things, because I'm highlighting it because I want people to read it. I want people to be aware of it, so that they will know how to proceed. The Children Care and Adoption Act of 2010 is an act that covers the children who go through what happens if a child encounters physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. And the real thrust of that act, hear me, because this is significant. The real thrust of that act is to take care of children, get this, Daniel, under the age of 18. And it is specifically spelled out there that it should be under the age of 18. And what is the purpose and what is the outcome? Is that if the children are encountering any kind of abuse that can be documented through the case study, case workers, whether it is physical or sexual, emotional, verbal, otherwise, that the child under the age of 18, get this, be placed in what is called child care service. Now, what does that include? That includes the child care service where they will be placed. This is what the Act provides for. You take children out of abusive situations and you put them in, and the Act actually specifies, and I will read from the Act, boarding home, so you put a child in a boarding home, or in a group home, or in a foster home, or you have them attending a training center, an assessment center, or a children's home. Now let me ask you, did you get that list? Question is, how many of these do you know are in existence in St. Vincent? And the boarding homes, group homes, foster homes, residential care places, training centers, assessment centers that is promised to be provided under this act. Structure, macro structure. In the micro reality, do we really have these things here? Because somehow or the other, the macro structure and what you should have in place, when it comes down to the micro level, it should match the need. So if we have, let us say, 1,000 children who require this kind of placement under the Act, do we have 100 places in terms of rooms and beds and boarding and facility? Do we have the facility for 1,000? And because there is this disparity, because there is this gap between what is promised for childcare service and what the real need is for children to be placed, then what obtains? If you can't move children out of abusive situation like you promised, if you can't do that because you don't have the requisite microstructure, if you don't do that, then guess what happens? They stay right where they are abused. You have an act that really cannot be enforced. Daniel, I don't have time this morning to go through all of the nitty-gritties of the act. It covers really, for example, something that you did yesterday. It covers how to report if a child is being abused and you are aware of it. You are actually mandated by this act to report it. To fail to report it, you are in contravention of the act. So you have to report it. And who do you report to? As far as I can remember from reading the act, you report to the director. There's a director of family services under the minister. Who would that minister be? The minister of mobilization. So you have to understand the channel who you report to. The act doesn't say report to the police. The act says report to the director. Under the director, you have other workers and other departments, how this should be done. The director, therefore, would then do, according to the act, would do an investigation or will deploy his or her staff to do investigation. This will take time. You will need caseworkers who will do assessment. Once the assessment is done according to the Act, once you go through these channels, according to the Act, there is what is called, the Act provides for emergency protection, which means that you can take the child out of the home, I think up to, there's some 14 days requirement for court work and all of that, but I think I remember, if somebody who knows the Act will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think up to 3 years. Up to 3 years, but that protection can be offered for this child. And then the major issue with this Act, why it is not being enforced with the effectiveness and efficiency to get children out of abusive situation, then is because of this section that is called assessment order. Everything must be done legally. And if you have any idea of the kind of orders for the care and protection of a child and what is involved in family court and how many orders you have to present and argue and ask the court for, I don't have the time again today to go through them, but there's a lot of orders for supervision, orders for assessment, order for psychiatric care if it's needed, order for this, order. You can't just do these things for a minor, for a child, without the legal meat provided by the court. And therefore, well, you know what the family court is, multiple issues, multiple children, multiple women, divorce cases, all that. Daniel, I feel so overwhelmed talking about this problem this morning. You can't do anything with children unless it's done legally. And there's a legal traffic jam, backlog, tied up. The court is inundated. So the fate of a child hangs in a balance, waiting for the traffic jamming court to clear up, so that supervision orders or removal orders. You can't just remove a child from a home, so that removal orders are issued, etc., etc. This is why the problem has been exacerbated by the resource issue, the leg on the ground issue, the court issue. At every turn I look, this problem of what is happening to our children is real. It's a tough one, Daniel, and bringing it to the fore this morning like you did invites discussion and conversation and debate, and I hope we can keep our foot on the pedal, because this, along with the issue of what's happening to women in St. Vincent and Grenadines. Those are very dear issues to my heart, and that's why I could talk on it this morning, because these are things I talk about all the time and teach and say, look, how do we make things better where this is concerned? Daniel, I want to commend you for putting the issue on the table. I want to counsel you to keep the issue burning without divulging too much in terms of the details related to the child, but to keep the issue burning. And may God give you speed, and may God give you strength. Take care.
All right, thanks, Pastor.
Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.